It has been a while since I did my last video on the Leica M-D. I think it is about time. What's up everyone? My name is Marcus from DM Photography, and in today's video I want to talk about the rather unusual exposure compensation or EV function of the Leica M-D. This rather unusual situation has mixed up a little bit my plans for the content that I was planning to create on this channel for you guys, and I now have to limit myself to produce content for the time being here at my studio or office. And I mean, it gives me a little bit of time. I have my notebook here where I usually write my scripts, and I'm working on like new content that I can produce here at home. What I also did now while sitting at home is I ordered some parts on the internet to build myself a new little vlogging kit. So I bought a case for the GoPro here so that I can attach my Rode Wireless Go. And I'm still waiting for the hand grip, and I'm looking forward to taking out this little vlogging rig for the first time and shooting some videos for you guys when the whole situation permits it again. But for now, I'm stuck here, and the exposure compensation topic is quite good to just talk about here. And I was able to shoot all the demo photos that you will see later from my balcony. So I didn't actually have to leave the house in order to shoot this video. So yeah, let's get into it. First of all, for those who do not know the Leica M-D, the Leica M-D is a digital Leica M series camera with no back screen. In principle, it is a Leica M262, but yeah, stripped off the screen and all of the features that a screen brings with you, like configuring white balance, shoot JPEG, convert them to black and white, and so on and so forth. So I have no menu. You just shoot as if it was an analog camera, and the camera will dump the raw files on the SD card. Now, the camera has basically an aperture priority mode. That means the light meter can select the shutter speed for you automatically. And so Leica thought to build in an EV function as well. So EV, or exposure compensation, is a function where you tell the light meter that you want to under or overexpose an image or the light meter reading by a certain value. So here it's in 1/3 steps of a full stop that you can configure EV. And how this usually works is you shoot a photo on a Leica now with a display, and you see that the photo is a little bit over or underexposed. So when I'm pointing the camera to the subject, the exposure reading or the light meter reading in aperture priority makes the image too dark or too bright. So you can use exposure compensation for that scene and shoot more photos with either plus or minus under or overexposing your image, and you can check the results. Now, on a Leica M-D, as I've shown you, you have no screen. So that means when you use exposure compensation, you can't really check what it did because you don't know what the light meter did if you do not know the camera well enough. I will leave a link in the description below to a video that I made a while back on the light meter of the Leica. So if you understand the light meter very well, you can use the exposure compensation or EV function reliably, let's say. But nonetheless, so just to quickly recap, the exposure compensation basically tells the light meter to over or underexpose a shot depending on what the light meter reads. Now with the M-D, we're in blind mode. But before I tell you a little bit about my experience with it and what I think of it, let me show you 4 examples of photos that show the function of exposure compensation, or this EV function, in 4 different scenes so that you get a feeling of what it actually does, and to also give you an idea of how much you can learn of that when you then need to use it on your Leica M-D where you don't have a screen actually. So let's take a look at the first example. This first shot that I shot from my balcony is the house just across my balcony, and it is a kind of like white-ish house. So the photo that you see here is completely raw and unedited. So usually when I would edit this photo, I would correct the color balance. And again, because we're shooting with a Leica M-D here, or I was shooting with a Leica M-D, I didn't have a screen nor the color balance settings of a digital or modern digital camera. The Leica M-D doesn't have that. So this is what the Leica M-D read as the white balance and used it to dump it into the raw, but it doesn't really matter for the EV compensation. Just that you know why the image is a little bit bluish and not so white. But anyway, so in the middle you see the exposure that aperture priority read from the scene when I press the shutter at basically no exposure compensation. And at the bottom you see the same shot but with exposure compensation -1, and on top you see the same shot with exposure compensation or EV plus 1.0. So I just chose one stop over and one stop under exposure that we really see the difference. Now with a scene that is dominated by something very bright, the light meter, and again you can learn more about that in the video that I was linking in the description of this video, the scene is or will be read by the light meter as something that it will compare to what is called neutral gray. You might know those neutral gray cards that you can use in photography to white balance your shots. Anyway, so the camera looked at all this white wall, made gray out of it, and set the exposure value or the shutter speed accordingly. And when you take the shot, you see that a white wall actually turns gray if you don't compensate at all. So that means if you use a digital Leica, not compensating for anything and not metering the light in specific spots, if you know exactly what this camera is doing, you will actually get a gray wall. So that means what you will have to do later, if possible, is salvage that in post-processing. So in Lightroom, Capture One, and so on and so forth. Now, if you generally know the light meter of a Leica camera, you know that you have to compensate for it. Or actually generally, any light meter in any camera, if you point your camera at something very white, like for example, snow or a white car or a white wall, you need to always remember that the camera will think of it as neutral gray and will potentially underexpose the photo. So it is a general or a good general rule of thumb to overexpose very bright surfaces. So here in this shot, we see that the upper part with the EV plus 1.0 is probably the better shot or almost a correct exposure for this photo. The shot at the bottom, just forget about it. I just wanted to show you that if you don't remember the going plus or minus, basically under or overexposing, if you look at a bright surface, if you chose the wrong direction, the image gets even darker and therefore worse. So you run potentially the risk that you cannot salvage it anymore. So again, to recap, if you shoot a scene that is dominated by something very bright, like this wall or snow or a big white car, you have to overexpose your image and just trust that the light meter reading is wrong and that overexposing is okay. Let's now take a look at the second example. So in this second example, you see the cover of my barbecue grill, and it's a very dark gray barbecue grill. And again, I just point my camera at this surface. It's of course this time a dark gray, not something very bright, but the same thing happens again. The Leica will read it and compare it to something that is called the neutral gray. And what it does now is opposite to what it did earlier. It will now overexpose. So it will make that dark surface look like that neutral gray. So in the middle, you see the light meter reading, or the setting that the camera chose for this image when you just shoot it without using exposure compensation at all. And you see it is too bright. So my cover doesn't look like that. And here on top we have the exposure compensation set to +1, so even overexposing more. It's this thing, if you're not used to this whole concept with compensating for the light meter reading and this whole neutral gray topic, you would think, oh, dark, that means I need to give more light, so let me overexpose. But that is actually not the case, because as you see at the bottom, -1 would be the correct exposure. I think you could even go a little bit further than -1 on the exposure compensation to get the real gray that you would see if you look at my grill with your eyes. So one more quick recap. When you take photos of bright surfaces, you need to overexpose your image. When you take photos of dark surfaces, or you photograph at night, you need to underexpose your image to get the correct exposure. Now, this is very important to remember and to somehow memorize or build some kind of like system in your head to really embrace and understand this. In order to take the correct exposure, you really need to understand how to read light. You really need to understand how your light meter works. This is of utmost importance. I know that with film or with these modern digital cameras, we can salvage a lot in post. So they are very forgiving. They have their limits. They're getting better and better. So newer Leica models are even better. Same for film. They are forgiving, but they are just forgiving that you can basically recover the image. You cannot get the most out of your post processing, be it for digital or in the darkroom with your film negatives, if your exposure is just kind of right. That's why I personally, for example, I'm also not the biggest fan of Sunny 16, but I need to use it sometimes when I need to be quick. But I always prefer to understand, to read the light in the scene correctly. Now, let me show you two more examples to make the point. So here we now see grass in front of my balcony. And grass is exactly in this, when it reflects back to the light meter, in this neutral gray kind of like brightness. So you see here that the exposure in the middle, basically without any compensation, is actually the right one. And if you over or underexpose this scene, you would get a wrong exposure. Again, with just one stop over under, you can recover it. But here in this particular example, the light meter and what the Leica M-D does is absolutely correct. And so remember that these types of greens or grays from the street, you don't have to compensate anything if your light meter reads the light value from there. And what I can tell you as a tip is, don't think that this works with all the greens. So for example, when you are in the forest, there might be greens that are a little bit darker, or the forest might be also shady because of all the leaves. So you still have the green, but it's a little bit darker. So if you just take your Leica M-D or your Leica M rangefinder, take photos in the forest, those will all be overexposed. The same thing will happen like on this grill example with my grill cover. So dark greens are too gray compared to that neutral gray, so the camera will overexpose. That means when you are with your Leica M-D in a forest and you don't shoot in manual mode, so use your aperture priority, use EV compensation and do like maybe 2/3 of a stop underexposed. I promise you, try it out. That will give you the correct exposure. So dark greens in the forest, 2/3 of a stop down, and your photo will look beautiful. Let's now take a look at the fourth and final example. Here we now see the sky that I took from my balcony, a very sunny day. We have beautiful white clouds and that blue sky. And what we see here is similar to the example in the beginning with the white wall. So in the middle, we see the photo that the Leica would have taken if you just press the shutter button and you leave the camera set to auto mode. So the scene is dominated by white clouds, which the camera again compares to the neutral gray, underexposes, and you get gray clouds. So if you ever wondered why your Leica M-D or Leica M in general takes photos of gray clouds, although they are white, it's again because of this light meter reading. So here we see on the right side EV +1, so again compensated by one stop, overexposed by one stop, which would be the correct example. On the left side, just for demo, a -1, of course, that didn't work. With this, I would like to conclude my examples and just generally want to tell you that in order for you to really leverage or make use of the exposure compensation of the Leica M-D, I'm sorry to say, but you have to understand the light meter. You have to understand how a Leica M rangefinder reads the light, because we have no screen. So you have no way of checking your photos while out there shooting. So if you use exposure compensation, you might be in for a surprise if you don't really know the rules about how the light is read, how aperture priority really works. That's why I personally do not use the function at all, because I know the light meter so well and I've shot thousands of photos with this camera. I know exactly where to read the light and then point the camera to the scene, compose, take the photos, take the shot. I don't fiddle around with the exposure compensation or EV function myself. But if you want to use it, and I've now shown you what to pay attention to and when to use it, how, just be aware of it. And because I was talking about we might be in for a surprise, you might be in for another surprise with this camera if you use the EV function. So you set it to +1 or whatever, or -1, -2/3, and you keep on shooting and you forget that you set the exposure value to compensate plus or minus. Of course, if you pay close attention and you look very exactly in the viewfinder, the camera will tell you, very subtle, but it will tell you that there is EV going on. But if you just happily shoot and you don't really pay attention to shutter speeds and whatever is going on down in the viewfinder, you might be in for a really bad surprise when you come back to your computer, download the photos and find out that the last couple of hours you shot with exposure compensation on, although you didn't want to use it. So if you use the function, just a word of caution, when you're done with it, just turn it off again. Just put it to 0. Do not put the camera away, turn it off and forget about it and then continue happily shooting. That will be very unpleasant probably. So just keep that in mind. I hope you learned something today, and for those who have not tried out this feature yet or were always wondering what it is actually for, I would say with everything you've seen now, take your camera and try it out and let me know in the comments below what you think. Also for those who are using the EV function on the Leica M-D, let me know in the comments below how you use it and why you use it. I would like to know that because, as I said, I personally do not use this function at all, ever. So I hope you learned something in today's video, and if you did so, or if you like this video and this type of content, please leave a like. It helps me a lot. And also for those who are new to the channel, just stumbled across this video, if you like this type of content, or you browsed maybe through my channel and you like what you've seen, please also consider subscribing. That helps me also a lot to grow this channel, and of course with this algorithm. But anyway, so that's it for today's video. I will now leave you with some of my shots and I'll see you next time.